Good morning, everybody. Simon Dixon here. And in this video, I would like to discuss whether Bitcoin is good money and can it really compete with gold? Or can it compete with the dollar? I'm going to go through all of those points and give you an overview of some of the things that I think make Bitcoin interesting and whether it can be any of those things. So the very first thing is, what is money? Well, if you look at the common definition of money, people, and I'll go through each of these points, that it is a store of value, a medium of exchange, and unit of account when functioning well. And the controversial thing is, I will say Bitcoin is none of those right now, but that might be controversial given that you know my stance on Bitcoin. And so I'm just going to go through each of those points and help people understand why the fact that Bitcoin is none of those things right now is one of the most interesting thoughts around why people are engaging in Bitcoin right now. So there's been a big debate over the years about whether Bitcoin is a store of value or medium of exchange, or whether it can ever be a unit of account. So let's go through each of those points and go through what Bitcoin is now and the opportunity that that presents to people that are engaging in this conversation before everyone else. Because that's the key. At the moment, the majority of the world, when I first got involved in Bitcoin after that first conference in 2011, there were very few people that know about it. Now, wherever you go in the world, pretty much everyone has heard of it, but everyone has a different perception of what it is. Still, the majority of the world thinks it's a scam, a Ponzi scheme, or a currency just for drug dealers. And that's okay, because that's part of the opportunity, as you'll learn from this video. The day that everybody knows that it's not a scam, a currency just for drug dealers, and a Ponzi scheme, because it's not, just for the record, then that's when a lot of the value and properties of Bitcoin will change, in my perception. The other final thing, just before I jump in, do not take this as financial advice. Please do your own research. You should not make any financial decision based upon what you hear. You should use this as an educational tool to make your own decisions and do your own research. Many of the things that I discussed today is just my speculation. I could be proven to be an idiot in history wearing a tinfoil hat that nobody should listen to. So with that said, let's jump straight in. So many people call Bitcoin a store of value today. When Bitcoin originally started, everyone was talking about how the concept of peer-to-peer electronic cash could change the world and allow people to transact for virtually free with anyone in the world, frictionless, borderless. And Bitcoin still has all of those properties. However, some of them and the focus has changed due to a few things that I'll discuss in this video. So first thing, store of value. What is store of value? Store of value is used generally by wealthy people and people that are engaging in the savings economy. So the first distinction to make is people that engage in a debt-based economy and people that engage in a savings-based economy. Debt has crowded out savings over the years due to the system and the way that money is outsourced to the private banking sector. For more on that, check out some of my previous videos where I go through what will trigger a financial crisis and many of these topics in previous videos. Just check out my YouTube channel, Simon Dixon, and you'll see more content on that. So for those that are in debt, they obviously don't want a store of value because they want the value of their debt to go down. So therefore, if you're in debt, then you're happy with government's policy because it may end up breaking the system, which means that your debt will be written off. And it also decreases the value of what you have to repay over time. And therefore, you want to stay in the existing system. For those that are in the savings-based system, which is less people, obviously, then you want a decent store of value so that your savings maintain their value. And so a store of value is really the ability of whatever you hold your wealth in to maintain its value and buy you similar level of goods as what it did previous week, previous year, previous decade, previous century even. And so traditionally, the best store of value has been gold. And it's been used by wealthy people for a number of reasons. Firstly, because it is not like a fiat-based currency, which is backed by debt. Is actually, this intrinsic value is its commodity-like properties. Gold is not backed by anything, and it does not need to be backed by anything, because it is what it is. It's a commodity that has utility. But in terms of what people use gold for, is to maintain value, and because it's politically neutral. So you're not at the mercy of a monetary policy of a particular country that you're in, and it's a global commodity. Interestingly, Bitcoin has many of those features and properties. It has a fixed money supply. It cannot be changed. It's got commodity-like features. So it can fulfill being a commodity probably better than gold in terms of its finite supply in the future. However, it is not currently a store of value. It is what's known as a speculative store of value. And I've got ahead of myself, but I'll go through what that is. So gold is the best example. The challenge is that most people that use gold as a store of value are already wealthy. And if you're already wealthy, then you probably only want to preserve your wealth. Whereas people that aren't yet wealthy, by their definition of wealthy, I'm not here to decide what that is for you, but they need to often do something more speculative in order to try and accumulate wealth rather than preserve wealth. So a good store of value is all about wealth preservation for people that already have wealth, so that they don't lose value in where they're storing their wealth. But if you want to build wealth, then you have to do something more speculative in order to try and accumulate wealth. And at the same time, it might end up to the demise of your wealth if you speculate wrong, or the increase of your wealth if you speculate right. And only the market will let you know if you're wrong or right. We just have to speculate in order to try and accumulate wealth. But the people that are already wealthy might decide that it's just about maintaining wealth. And the traditional definition of a store of value is it's about maintaining wealth. So at the moment, Bitcoin is not really a mechanism for maintaining wealth. It is what I call a speculative store of value. And by speculative store of value, it means that people are speculating that one day Bitcoin will be a good asset for maintaining wealth. But at the moment, it's turned out to be an amazing asset, depending on when you got in, whether you were holding it or not, for those looking to build wealth. And that is because it is a fixed supply. The supply of Bitcoin will never change. There will only ever be 21 million of them. And it is already the largest supercomputer in the world, which means that its security means that only at the government level could somebody invest in the infrastructure to try and take it down. And even then, it would be a futile task because it's a decentralized network. You'd have to simultaneously take down all the people mining, which are doing it globally around the world. And also you'd have to figure out the whole process of performing a 51% attack. Anyone engaged in the industry, it has no incentive to do that, but a bad actor like a government would have to invest billions in order to try and achieve that. And then it might not succeed anyway because the code can be forked and moved based upon such an extreme circumstance and continue. So because of that, it's got its commodity-like features as well. And a very important part of that is the fact that it's not created by a centralized entity, a company, a person. It doesn't have a CEO. It's open source code, is maintained and upgraded by the community based upon consensus. There's no risk of someone being attacked or arrested or dying or any of those types of things. Bitcoin's already tackled those issues, which is why it's become more like a commodity as opposed to anything else in the cryptocurrency industry. But what do I mean by a speculative store of value? A speculative store of value means that if Bitcoin, and that is the if, becomes a store of value, which is defined as being an asset class which maintains people's wealth, then I believe that it will be valued significantly higher than its current price. I've personally seen my $30 Bitcoin crash to $3. I've seen my $1,250 Bitcoin crash to $250. I've seen my $20,000 Bitcoin crash to $3,000. And I fully anticipate, my own opinion, do your own research, not financial advice, that my $100,000 Bitcoin will someday crash to $20,000 or $30,000. And that cycle will continue as the world adjusts to figuring out the true value that Bitcoin brings. I obviously discussed this, so I don't want to go in depth, but the value that Bitcoin brings is that it allows you to own your own money, spend your own money, which you can't do at a bank or with most other types of money. See my other videos where I talked about the 6 different forms of money. And it's got a fixed money supply, which means that if it becomes more useful, then the only way that that can be penetrated into the market is through an increase in the price over time, long term, the more utility it has and the more people use it. And because there will be a shortage in the supply, and unfortunately, if you lose your Bitcoin, you lose your private key, then the money supply decreases. So as people lose their Bitcoin, that 21 million goes down because it can't be accessed or used again. So that is what makes it our world's best shot at achieving sound money. But the world doesn't realize that right now. The vast majority of the world still think it's a scam, a currency just for drug dealers, or a Ponzi scheme for various reasons, because they haven't engaged in it yet, they haven't used it yet, or their country has not shown them why it's important to own your own money, spend your own money, and have or understand the economics of Bitcoin and its fixed money supply. So for that reason, Bitcoin is a speculative store of value. The day that everybody or most people or the majority of the world don't think or understand, and they will gradually, in my perspective, come to the realization that it's not any of those things. It's not just a Ponzi scheme. It's not just a currency just for drug dealers, and it's not a scam. Then it will no longer be a speculative store of value and has great potential at being a store of value. Better than gold, really. Obviously, gold has, what it's got going for it is its long history, and the fact that central banks use it in order to preserve wealth as a world reserve commodity. I believe that central banks see other videos of how I think that's going to happen during the next financial crisis are going to be accumulating Bitcoin. And there was already a great article out the other day how Bulgaria officially has more US dollar value of Bitcoin than gold as a country, and it's worth more than the Bitcoin position is worth more than their national debt. And I think other countries are going to take notice and speculate on that as well. And at the central bank level, I think the smaller central banks are going to start speculating that it can become a great store of value. So just to recap before we go through the other 2 properties, is Bitcoin a store of value? It's a speculative store of value because it hasn't reached the status where it has a stable preservation of wealth. In history, through its 10 to 11, 12 years, it's been a great generator of wealth as opposed to a maintainer of wealth, which is why many people are speculating on whether it will become a preserver of wealth. And if it does become a preserver of wealth, my personal opinion, not financial advice, do your own research, is that the price has to be significantly higher than where it is today, because there's only 21 million of them and the world is going to be competing for those. So that's the first thing, store of value. Second is medium of exchange. A medium of exchange just means that you can use it to buy things in the simplest form. And for most people, your domestic currency is the best medium of exchange. That's not the case for all people. There are some countries where the government's policy around their monetary policy has made that their local domestic currency a really bad medium of exchange, as you go through deflation and hyperinflation and various other things that governments have done. Unfortunately, if you live in such a country, then it's very unfortunate for you, and you know the catastrophic effect that it has on your savings and ability to function when you can't pay your rent because the currency value is changing so speculatively and wildly. And the effect that has on people, it's catastrophic. It kills people. It's really, really bad. You don't want that to happen in your country. Just going to take a quick water break. Okay, we're back. But for most people, if you don't live in one of those countries, then really the main expenses that you incur is the country that you're going to use as a medium of exchange. So if you live in the United States, then your rent is charged in dollars, your groceries are charged in dollars, and each month you need to plan your life around having enough dollars to cover your rent, your mortgage, your everyday expenses. And most people are in a position whereby they can only think about one currency because they're in a debt-based system, and therefore they never reach the savings point. And if they never reach the savings point, then they never actually think about other currencies, other asset classes, investments, savings, those types of questions. They just can't get to that stage yet. And a debt-based economy is driving people into more and more people into that, which is what a traditional fiat currency does. And also it encourages you to take out debt products so that you can consume more, and that increases the money supply and leads to the illusion of growth and actually increase in the amount of money that you spend. It's being done on debt rather than savings, which has its own side effect, but it makes governments feel like their economies are progressing. And so most people can't get beyond their domestic currency. Now, if they engage in Bitcoin and then they have to cover their rent each month, and based upon whether Bitcoin is pumping relative to their domestic currency or crashing relative to their domestic currency, then the vast majority of people in a debt-based economy cannot plan their living and their expenses around that because they may not be able to meet their ongoing obligations just because of a speculation or change in the value of crypto or Bitcoin during that time. And so most people can never get to that point where Bitcoin can be a medium of exchange. I think a lot of people, we can get there eventually, definitely. But this is why, for many people, it's not a great medium of exchange. However, those that have savings and those that have wealth and those that are more globally minded, i.e. because they've got more wealth, they're able to travel a lot more, they start to have to engage in international currency speculation and currency wars. And it starts to matter where you hold your savings and in which currency. And so those that are in that part of, in that particular situation, Bitcoin is and can be a great medium of exchange, but only on a few conditions. That is that you have enough of your domestic currency in order to meet all your obligations if the price of Bitcoin is performing very poorly in that particular moment, in which case you can interchange between whether you spend your Bitcoin or whether you spend your domestic currency. And so in good times, you might feel, okay, my Bitcoin savings are worth significantly more than my fiat currency, and I might spend some of my Bitcoin this month. And, I've had a wealth effect over that time period because it's performed well relative to my domestic currency. And there are many ways of using Bitcoin as a medium of exchange. The most conservative is using a Bitcoin debit card, in which case it converts to your local fiat, and the merchant that's accepting it just thinks you're using fiat currency through Visa or MasterCard as usual. Or there are a growing number of people that are trying to accumulate Bitcoin but can't afford to buy it, and therefore they're selling their services or selling their goods and products in Bitcoin, and they're taking that and they're trying to save them. So it's driving people into savings because they understand the economics of Bitcoin, and they're happy. If you spend in their local domestic currency, then they spend that. And if they accept Bitcoin and you send them some Bitcoin for the purchase, then they save that. I know people that do that quite a lot. And so the reason that people do that is something called Gresham's law. And Gresham's law is the concept that good money crowds out bad money. So if you have several forms of money, what you tend to want to do is spend what you consider the worst money that first, and you want to save the best form of money, the one that you think is going to be worth more in the future. And so because of Gresham's law, people that understand the economics of Bitcoin, they try and spend their fiat and save their Bitcoin, and that discourages using Bitcoin as a medium of exchange. However, during the whole fluctuations of Bitcoin versus their domestic currency, they might decide to take some of their savings out and spend that. But when Bitcoin is not performing well relative to their domestic currency, they might decide to save it instead and hold it until a price that they think will get them better value for when they spend that money. And so for this reason, it's driving savings, but it's also not a great medium of exchange unless you're in a position of wealth and you can make those, you're fortunate enough to be able to make those choices. People that are living paycheck to paycheck or credit card to credit card, they don't have the luxury, unfortunately, of being able to choose which currency. They tend to have to pay things only in their domestic currency, and they can't afford to speculate on international currency conversion. And so that's where a lot of people in the debt-based economy are, which is why it's slower to get adoption, because it tends to be getting adoption from the wealthier faster than those that can't afford to make currency risks, unless you're in an economy where your domestic currency is performing worse all the time than Bitcoin. For example, if you're in Zimbabwe or a country that's going through some hyperinflationary effect or systemic risk event. Now, I believe that there's a global financial crisis coming that will affect everyone in the world. And it's at those phases when people start to think about whether the Bitcoin is a better form of money than what's happening with their traditional money that can be seized. They might not be able to spend it. It might be bailed in. It could be subject to bailout. It could be inflated away, deflated away, and all sorts of things that happen during the next financial crisis. So before the next global systemic risk event, at the moment, if you're a global citizen, you travel a lot, then US dollar is the best medium of exchange today. You can spend it more places than anywhere else. And because it is the world reserve currency, because it prices gold, prices oil, and is backed by the largest military force in the world, then it tends to be a good medium of exchange, but only while the traditional system still prevails. For more thoughts on what I think is going to happen during the next financial crisis, or what's going to trigger the next financial crisis, see some of my other videos, like 7 events that could trigger the financial crisis and how banks and governments are reacting. Check those out on either YouTube or Twitter. And so really the properties of a medium of exchange is really about your wealth situation. If you are wealthier, then you are probably engaging in global currencies, and you can choose what to save, what to spend. If you're living debt, credit card to credit card, paycheck to paycheck, then Bitcoin at this stage is not a good medium of exchange, because it's you can't afford such volatility in order to meet your obligations. So we talked about Gresham's law, and I already said how Bitcoin is a great medium of exchange if you're in that position. So the final property is what's known as a unit of account. And a unit of account is really more of a psychological thing. It's how we price things and how we think. As humans, we often think of value in terms of their value in money and currency. So we learn the value of a house by how many dollars it is, how many pounds it is, how many renminbi it is, or how you think. Most people tend to have in their psychology a dominant currency that they think in. And most people tend to think in terms of their domestic currency because it's what they always were brought up on. They understand it because they've engaged in it. As a child, we don't have any concept of value. We don't know what a pound is worth. We don't know, what a good is worth. We have no concept of what a unit of account is. Over time, we're taught unit of account, and it tends to be the domestic currency where we spend most of our goods. And those who are in wealthier that engage in financial education might start thinking about what is the best place to put their money. But a unit of account is essentially how we think. Now, there's some big barriers with Bitcoin becoming a unit of account. And that is because it is what is known as a deflationary currency, which it has a fixed money supply. It was forecasted that as long as it becomes more useful, its value will go up and up and up over time, over the long term, as it gets rarer and more people want it. And so they're willing to pay a higher price for it in an efficient market. Because of that, it gave its Bitcoin is denominated in 8 decimal places. By that, I mean, if you take $1, it is $12.22. If you take a pound, it is £3.63. People can only think in a maximum of 2 decimal places. Bitcoin has 8 decimal places. And the reason for that is because they forecasted that if Bitcoin succeeds, it could be worth millions of dollars in the future. And therefore, in order to spend on small goods, you're going to need more and more decimal places, because a bottle of water might in the future be worth 0.0000001. I don't know if I counted that right, but you get the point. Bitcoin. And so in the world of Bitcoin, we have the concept of a Bitcoin, which at the time of recording this video is worth approximately $10,000. And then you have a Satoshi, and a Satoshi is the smallest denominated decimal place, the 8th decimal place. Kind of like you have pence and cents in the world of pounds and dollars. And so because of that, Bitcoin is a very bad unit of account because it's very hard. I've been using Bitcoin for a long time, and I still can't think in terms of Bitcoin. I don't know, I can't think in my mind the value of 1 Satoshi. I can just about know the value of 1 Bitcoin in my mind relative to comparing it to a fiat currency like dollars or pounds. A common mantra and phrase within the Bitcoin community is that 1 Bitcoin is worth 1 Bitcoin. I believe in the end, 1 Bitcoin can be worth 1 Bitcoin, but until it is a unit of account, a medium of exchange, and a store of value, then 1 Bitcoin will always be thought of by humans in terms of value they understand, which is their domestic currency. And so really, Bitcoin becoming a unit of account is this concept of hyper-Bitcoinization, where the whole world starts to price things in Bitcoin. Currently, very few things are priced in Bitcoin, particularly speculative things like alternative tokens and coins are often priced in Bitcoin. And you have merchants out there that price things in Bitcoin. They tend to be people that understand the value of Bitcoin, want to receive Bitcoin so that they can save it, and they have enough fiat currency to cover their everyday expenses, or they just have enough wealth in order to suck up the volatility if when they want to spend the money, the price of Bitcoin is not what they want. They can afford that because they've got enough wealth or savings to do that. And really the only way for this to happen is, I believe that over time, as I've alluded to, that once Bitcoin is no longer a speculative store of value, then it could become a store of value which maintains its wealth. And once it maintains its wealth and people use it as a real store of value, like they use gold at the moment, and it's no longer a mechanism for accumulating wealth, then more and more people will, as more and more people become wealthy, they spend their savings at a great, although they can afford to spend more savings. At the moment, consumerism on debt is the main economic growth engine. But as more and more wealth effect happens in the world, if more and more people are saving in Bitcoin and it becomes more and more useful, therefore the price is the only way that can be reflected because of its fixed supply, then more and more people will consume at greater rates using their savings. And it can become a medium of exchange at that point. And if it reaches that stage where, let's say, Bitcoin's worth $1 million, everyone in the world understands its value and what it can be used, then at that point, you could use the 8th decimal place, what's known as a Satoshi, as the unit of account. Because when I, for example, go to Vietnam and I'm spending the Vietnamese dong, I would have a million, Vietnamese dong note, or a 10 million, or, and the same in Korea and Japan. And that's okay, but we can't really think in terms of that 8 decimal places because it's very hard for humans to think like that, just the way our brains are wired. And so eventually we might be talking in terms of this costs 1 million Satoshis, or this costs 10 Satoshis. But once you get to those last few decimal places, then there's, that's the key, I think, to eventually getting to unit of account. So, very long video. I always try and keep them short. Never, ever, ever succeeded. But here is what the value of Bitcoin is. Let's summarize it in its simplest form. Bitcoin is the world's best shot, I believe, at achieving sound money. It is not sound money right now. Well, it is sound money right now for those that engage in the ecosystem and understand the economics of Bitcoin. But for the majority of the world, they haven't come to that realization right now. The reason it can be sound money and the world's best shot we've got at achieving it is because it's money you can own. Money at a bank you can't own. You're at the mercy of the bank's policies. It's money you can spend peer-to-peer, hardware wallet to hardware wallet. Some technical challenges involved in getting to that stage, but it will get easier and easier over time. The money at a bank you can't spend. And most fiat currencies are at the mercy of the government's agenda for that country, which tends to lead to increased levels of debt and devaluing of that currency. And Bitcoin's the opposite. It's a fixed money supply. It doesn't have a political agenda to serve a particular country, and nobody has the authority to change that. And it's virtually impossible. In fact, I'd say impossible at this stage to change that unless there was a whole consensus around the whole community wanting to change that. Because of that reason, I believe that more and more people are going to discover that over time. And there's going to be catalyst events that drive people into it. One catalyst event is those that are living paycheck to paycheck, credit card to credit card. Then during a next systemic risk event or financial crisis, that could be the trigger for them realizing that their own, say, money or debt, they need to reevaluate that currency and look at something else. For those that are building wealth, they're probably going to be the first to adopt and realize that. And that's why it tends to be being scooped up. Most of the Bitcoin is being scooped up by people that have, larger quantities of savings and more wealthy people, because they can use it as all three, a speculative store of value, a medium of exchange, and if they choose, a unit of account and more speculative things that are pricing things in Bitcoin. The important point to understand here from my speculation, do your own research, not financial advice. You should not use this information to make any kind of a decision without you being comfortable with that decision and doing your own research, is that the less people that know that, the more opportunity is to generate wealth at the expense of people that haven't figured that out yet. And that is why I call it a speculative store of value. And one of the most interesting financial instruments, as it were, that we've seen for an awful long time. It has the potential to disrupt each and every financial product in the world. And it has the potential to touch the lives of every person in the world eventually that's connected to the internet. And so what you've got to understand is that once Bitcoin becomes all three, which is when governments say that Bitcoin's, the store of value, medium of exchange, unit account, central banks say it, JP Morgan says it, Warren Buffett says it, all these people, Peter, I've forgotten who I'm trying to say there, the gold guy that's very negative on crypto. Someone will say it in the comments. Once all these people realize that, and unfortunately they may pass away before they realize that, I'm not wishing that upon anyone, but if someone's reaching that stage of life and they can't be patient enough for this to play out, that's when Bitcoin becomes a store of value and no longer a speculative store of value. And at that point, it's about preserving wealth rather than increasing wealth, is my perspective. So those that get on board to this realization before the masses are the people that gain from anything, any price increases or decreases if this fails, that can result as Bitcoin becomes no longer a speculative store of value or store of value. So takeaway, if you want people to still believe that Bitcoin is a currency just for drug dealers, a Ponzi scheme or a scam, because that creates the opportunity to get in at a better price than when they realize it's not a scam, a Ponzi scheme or a currency just for drug dealers, and they realize the true utility and want to actually use it. And my personal speculation and belief is that in the future, everyone's going to want to use it, but we don't know at which point they will use it, because it depends on the politics of their country and what happens to their debt and when they engage into the savings-based economy over the debt-based economy. So I believe that Bitcoin can eventually be all three. I think it will be a store of value first. Then it can be used as a medium of exchange for the wealthy people, but then a medium of exchange for people that don't necessarily have spare wealth once the whole world has adapted to that. And at that stage is likely to become a unit of account as people start to price things in Bitcoin as opposed to their domestic currency, depending on what's happening with their domestic currency. But it can also coexist with fiat money, and it can make fiat better. The fact that people have an exit and a choice means that I believe governments are going to not just let the system go down, they're going to implement policies to make their own currencies more attractive. And therefore, you can engage in this hybrid world of better fiat currencies as a result of Bitcoin, and also engage in Bitcoin, giving you the personal freedom and sovereignty of being able to own your own money, spend your own money, and benefit from a monetary policy that really doesn't depend on who gets elected in your country or how the government reacts to certain things. So that's the takeaway. I'm now getting back to work with companies building the future of finance. I hope you enjoyed this content. What I'd love for you to do is place a comment underneath. Let me know what you would like to see. Let me know what other things you'd like me to cover in future videos. And please do like, retweet. I want as many people to be prepared for what I think is coming next so they can make their own decisions about whether I'm a tinfoil hat wearing conspiracy theorist that's an idiot, or whether this is something that they need to start thinking about and make better decisions around what they think is coming next. So please do retweet, please do like, please do share. Head over to my YouTube channel, Simon Dixon, hit the subscribe button. Next to it, there's a bell symbol. If you click that, YouTube will actually send you an email every time we go live, or follow me on Twitter at Simon Dixon Twit, or like my Facebook page, and we'll try and make sure these videos continue to go out every time something changes or where we are in crypto. So I'm going back to work. Thank you for your time.